on Con Terrace would only hold 18 members at full capacity with no room for expansion. Our Rose Street residence was somewhat bigger, and it had an upstairs suitable for living quarters. During this era, FarmHouse expanded its role outside the College of Agriculture, becoming involved in campus activities such as homecoming float contest, pushcart derby entries, Little Kentucky Derby participation, interfraternity, sporting events, and many, many others. It was during this time that FarmHouse won its first interfraternity basketball championship. I remember this very clearly because Bob Goodlett, one of my roommates at the time, was manager of the team. Bob was a very intense and competitive manager who wanted that championship more than anything else. The Rose Street property also contained an elongated parking lot behind the house that held maybe a half dozen or so cars if properly parked. In the spring of 1956, the fellows in the house decided to park some cars for the state basketball tournament to make a little extra money. On a given day, they collected $50 from fans attending the game. But one problem arose when some of the fans stayed all day while others wanted to leave after their teams had lost. Now, in order to get these cars out, a wrecker had to be brought in, and 2 of these cars had to be moved. Well, this ended up costing us $50, wiping out all the proceeds for the day. Not only did we lose all the money we made on a given day, but when those car owners came back and saw their cars had been moved, they threatened to sue us until we told them, hey, we were a nonprofit organization and didn't have any money. So they left. They weren't too happy, but they left. Now, one of the other vivid memories I have of the Rose Street residence was the close proximity of the house to a little grill at the corner of Rose and Euclid called the Huddle, owned and operated by a guy by the name of Jim True. Now, Jim was a very personable fellow who knew all the FarmHouse guys by name. And in fact, he was so well liked that on many occasions we invited him to some of our social events. I always thought that we should have made Jim an honorary member because actually he knew more about FarmHouse than some of our members. I could go on and on about stories, but there is one other story I'd like to tell you, at least one other, and this relates to Bob Goodlett again. Bob was our president in 1957, and he tells this story about the time that President Eisenhower came to town in Lexington in 1956 and spoke at Memorial Coliseum. Now, the Secret Service fellows came by the house to do an inspection since the fraternity was only located a few blocks from where the president was going to be speaking. Now, Bob recalls that when he got out of class at 3 o'clock and returned to the house, Mom Ernston, our first house mother, was holding at bay 3 Secret Service guys on the porch and wouldn't let them in the house until he said, "It's okay, Mom." Well, I think my 5 minutes is up, or pretty close to it, so I'm going to kind of wind it down. At this time, I would like for all of those of you who are members or were members of the fraternity that lived at Rose Street, 404 Rose Street in the 1955-1958 era, would you please stand and take a bow? All of you that lived in the house or were members at that time. Thank you. I would be remiss not to mention our current chapter officers and the immediate past officers. And these guys in the house, they've already been mentioned earlier, but they've done such a wonderful job in getting all these things together. And I'd like to, again, recognize them. So let's give them a big hand as well. Thanks for giving me a few minutes to talk about Rose Street, and I hope that many of you can come back at our 75th anniversary in the year 2026. Let's see what we can do, folks. Thank you.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you for doing that for us. Now, let's go on to Aylesford Place. Dr. Dennis Liptrap. Come tell us a little bit about the Aylesford era.
Thank you, Lynwood, and it's indeed a pleasure for me to represent that era. I think I see several of our brothers out here that could probably tell even more stories than I could. Dr. Wall, I want to express my appreciation to you for mentoring so many farmhouse folks and for building such good tables. Those tables did carry over from Con Terrace to Rose Street to Aylesford, and we had a very active Wives and Mothers Club that helped with the furnishing, new curtains, and that sort of thing in that particular house. Now, folks, particularly you younger members that are in our present house, I want to point out that Aylesford, if you go by it, it was a little bigger than Rose. It had been a Kappa Alpha fraternity house before we moved in, and the neighbors were glad to see us there. We didn't have air conditioning. The rooms were rather small except for one on the very top floor. And as I recall, we had 2 showers and 1 tub. But if you wanted a tub bath on the top floor, you had to draw your water before anybody took a shower on the second floor. We had several house mothers while we were there. Mrs. Urmston finished her tenure at Aylesford Place. We had Mom Nelson, who was there 1 year, Catherine Dennis, Joe Hall's mother-in-law, Coach Joe Hall's mother-in-law. She was house mother when I was there. Mrs. Heilburn, Scotty Arnold started a long tenure, and Mrs. Kellogg, who was the change. Now, I point this out because Farmhouse is a home away from home. And we're probably one of the few fraternities on this campus and the few fraternities that have had a house mother for every year of their existence. Mom Dennis, when I was there, and you remember this, guys, we met in the parlor before dinner every night. And when the house mother entered the room, you stood up. The bell was rung one time and you come down. And when the bell was rung the second time, we all moved to dinner. House mother first. We had regular etiquette lessons. And us farm boys needed a little of that. But I point this out, we had several house mothers in that tenure. We were a rowdy bunch. I think we tried their patience. But farmhouse men live with their stomachs, and we had one cook that I know of. Her name was Liz. I think we liked Liz's as cooks. If Elizabeth Girton, one of our more recent long-term cooks, was tall and thin, Liz Embry was short and a little bit thicker. But Liz could cook, and one of my favorite meals was when she served cornbread dressing balls and gravy. Folks, that was living. And I didn't care what the meat was that night. Our first president at Aylesford was Warren Wilson. Our last president that served a full year was Donnie Colliver. In between, when I look at it, are some high-ranking military officials, some farmers, several PhDs, a department chairman, a lawyer in our Washington's capital, who happens also to be the first Sullivan Medallion winner, Clyde Kirtley, and our last president that started his tenure at Aylesford and ended up at 420 Hilltop was Monty Conrad. Another thing about our house, you know, those of you that have been active in the present house know that we've been at least 2, if not 3 rounds of sprinklers to meet fire inspection codes. That's been a fun experience. At Aylesford Place, we didn't have sprinklers. We had a furnace. But when it got up to the sleeping rooms, something happened to the heat. It never made it there. So the rooms had open flame space heaters, gas space heaters. Folks, look at the folks that survived Aylesford. It's a wonder that we're all here, that we didn't die of carbon monoxide poisoning. A couple or three interesting things, and I see the tradition hasn't totally waned, but trees were a regular occurrence. There was a big old tree out in front of the house, and if you got pinned, engaged, or were just generally ornery, you generally got carted to the tree, tied to it, soaked with about anything we could carry, and then if it was a pinning or an engagement, your lovely young lady got to come and help salve your wounds. One fellow I do remember put his head through the wall as we went down, and I'm glad we haven't tried that. Our present house has concrete block walls. Another visible, and there's a few of you remember, Art Zadanswick, my roommate, and I had a pet squirrel. It's a baby squirrel that we found one fall, and we took him in and we kept him over the winter, and his name was Booger. He liked Oreo cookies. And you darn well better have a long sleeve shirt on and long pants when we let him out the cage. The only time that I saw Liz speechless was the time I brought Booger in the kitchen. She picked up a big butcher knife and backed in the corner and said, "Get that thing out of here." It took Art Zadanswick 20 years to get over the fact that I carried him outside in the spring and he ran up a tree. Dances in the basement. How many of you remember dances in the basement? You all remember that? Well, you saw a picture or two of the house. Now, I'm not exactly altitude challenged with height, but I didn't have a lot of excess headroom in that basement. And there was a little corner off back where we would put a band, and it could get quite loud. The neighbors liked it, though, because we kept it inside. There was brick pillars to support the house, and so the dance floor became quite challenging. One of the more memorable dates I had happened to be the mop. I didn't have a date that night. I picked up the mop. I danced one dance with the mop, and I had a partner every dance after that. I think you have not lived until you've come to the university, or at least I think what we talk about in FarmHouse, a home away from home, the friendships that you make, the fellowship that lasts all of your life. It was a wonderful experience.
Thank you, Dennis. That was grand. You know, I think the group made progress through the years. It was better to tie the guys up against the tree than it was to take them, throw them in the horse trough out there on the farm when we were at Con Terrace. That was our ritual. And I think we gave Richard Clement a baptizing in the bathtub with ice cubes one time. You remember that, Richard? All right. Some of you got to go by the house today. You didn't get a chance to meet all of our active and some of our pledges, but I hope during this weekend you'll have a chance to meet some of these outstanding people. We've got a fine group there, and they're under the leadership of an outstanding man, Aaron Miller. And we're going to call on Aaron to bring us up to date on the fraternity business there at Hilltop. Now, he's got a long stretch of time to cover, but I think he can do it in his Al-Key time. Come on, Aaron.
Good evening, everyone. I would just like to take this chance to welcome you all to the University of Kentucky. It may be your first time. You've been back in a while, and we want to encourage you to come by the chapter house tomorrow afternoon and kind of visit with some of us new guys. We may need to hear some stories from what happens in the past. But tonight, as Mr. Schrader's alluded to, I have the longest period of FarmHouse to cover, but yet I've had the shortest experience of any of the other speakers, so hopefully I'll be able to cover some of the things that's happened in the Hilltop era and tell you some things that we've done in the past and how we've made some different changes. On October 14th of 1973, there was a dedication service to recognize 420 Hilltop Avenue as the next home of FarmHouse. Some men that were very instrumental in the accomplishment of this project were Association Board Dennis Liptrap, Harvey Hamilton, Dr. Wall, and Lewis Conrad, the current chapter president, and many others were also in on the project. But before becoming the chapter house, this was known as the Kitten Lodge. It lodged the UK football team. But when the members moved into the house, and they kept up the FarmHouse motto as builders of men. And I contacted one alumni, and Bobby Gaffney. He alluded to as being house manager, this kind of helped him keep up the motto as builders of men. Dr. Liptrap alluded to Liz being the cook at Ellsford, but she didn't transfer to the Hilltop Avenue location, so they had to hire a new cook. But she had a tendency to be late or not show up for work, so as house manager, Bobby Gaffney said everyone volunteered him to have to cook 3 or 4 days a week. So if your wife doesn't know that you can cook, that's a tip to let him cook for you tomorrow night. But then in 1975, just 2 years after we moved into the Hilltop House, 2 very distinguished and dedicated alumni helped form a very important service to our chapter. That was the Foundation Board. Mr. Damon Talley and Mr. Kenneth Overholtz were very instrumental in this process. This allows you as alumni an avenue of tax-free donations, but also allows us as active members to use this for different educational needs. And in 1987, the Foundation Board funded a project to add a computer room into our current chapter house. And today they're used for different educational trips, and they offer scholarships to active and prospective members. But you may think, how has the chapter house changed in its looks over the years? We've been through several different remodeling projects. 1983 was the first project. We peaked out in our farmhouse membership in 1978 with 81 members. And so we needed some different changes to happen. So they changed the TV room to the current tier structure that we have now. It's kind of like an old type movie theater. There's 3 different tiers that we set on, so that helped accommodate the growing membership, and also it was easier to clean. Within 4 years after that, we went through our first round of remodeling with new doors and new ceilings and a new sprinkler system and fire alarms. And so all those things were added into the house in 1987. And then in 98, right before we hosted the conclave, the house got a major overhauling. They added new carpet. They did some different things downstairs. But the most important thing is those walls got the 400th coat of paint since we moved into the house. And most importantly, in the recent past, just 2 weeks ago, we received a boiler after taking cold showers all summer long. What are some things that FarmHouse is known on the UK campus and the community? What are some of our accomplishments in these areas? One of those very important things that may come to your mind is the community service that FarmHouse does. Over the years, we've participated in many different things such as blood drives, fundraising for the American Cancer Society, Race for the Cure, Lexington City Book Fair, and many other activities. But one of our very special community service activities that we do now is we work at an Easter Seals camp in northern Kentucky called Camp Cossack. And this is a summer camp for mentally retarded and handicapped children, and so we go up there and do some different projects and help them out. And we've also currently, for the last 4 years, been working with Adopt a Highway. We've adopted 2.5 miles on Richmond Road, I believe the dirtiest stretch of road in Lexington, to pick up the trash on, and so we've been doing that in the recent past. Another strength of FarmHouse Fraternity is our involvement in campus organizations. Yes, as ag students, many of us are involved in the College of Ag, but we're also involved on the main campus since we've moved into the Hilltop House. For example, from 1990 to 93, a FarmHouse man was the president of the Student Government Association, the Interfraternity Council, the Student Development Council, and also the Greek Activities Steering Committee. These are some of the most prestigious organizations on campus, and a FarmHouse man was president of those. And at the same time, these gentlemen some of these have been recognized tonight, but one of the most distinguished awards to a Greek member is becoming the Greek Man of the Year. FarmHouse has 4 of those in the history of FarmHouse, and I'd like to recognize all those tonight. In 1967, Mr. Clyde Kirtley, if you'd please stand. And then in 1983, Mr. Reed White. 1992, Shannon Morgan. And in 1995, Mark Engstrom. All these men received this prestigious award. They need a round of applause. These are just some of our accomplishments on the main campus. We're still involved in the College of Ag. For instance, in 1982, the Agriculture Student Council, the entire officer team, was made up of FarmHouse men. And we kind of keep that tradition alive in the recent past. 6 of the last 7 years, the president of the Agriculture Student Council has been a FarmHouse man. Another thing about FarmHouse, our scholastic achievement. Mr. Schrader's alluded to how our achievements have been throughout the history, but since we've moved into the Hilltop Avenue house, we've lived there 54 semesters. We've been first in grades 28 of those 54. But on top of that, we've been in the top 5, 48 of 54 semesters since we've lived there. Good moral character also goes along with being a FarmHouse member. We've continually been known for being the nice guys on campus. In trying to spread our morality to others, we've also tried to spread our spirituality. So in 1995, we started a thing called Greek Prayer Breakfast. So during the annual Greek Week on the University of Kentucky campus, we invite all the Greeks to come at 7 o'clock in the morning for a breakfast. And as FarmHouse members, we do all the cooking, do all the serving, and we invite a guest to do the speaking. And so in 95, there's around 50 to 60, maybe 70 people there. But this past year, we had an attendance of over 150 members at the Greek Prayer Breakfast. One other tradition that's really current that many alumni that are older may not know about is our history with the Tug of War intramural event. Since 1979, FarmHouse has won that event 20 times. That's 20 out of the last 23 years. That's a pretty good record. And then in 1998, as I alluded before, FarmHouse in Kentucky hosted the conclave. We've made several changes in our chapter operations since that time. We've adopted a strategic plan that a lot of businesses use nowadays. And we noticed that a lot of chapters that were really excelling in the national awards were using this process. So we decided to adopt that in 1999. And as they pointed out before, we've begun to win many awards. In 1999 at the Greek banquet, we won 7 of those 11 awards. In 2000, we stepped it up a little and won 8 out of 11. So we've made several improvements in the past. And I'd like to recognize the gentleman again. He's already been recognized before, but he kind of spearheaded and went against a lot of old traditions in FarmHouse, and he led us into the plan of strategic plan, and that let him win the President of the Year award from International FarmHouse. So I'd like to recognize Gary Weston again. These next ladies I'm going to recognize have been recognized before, but you can't give a house mother enough recognition. I think Miss Seth had to leave tonight, but we still have Mom Lee with us, and I want you to stand up. You deserve another round of applause. Dr. Liptrap also alluded to the wonderful cooks we've had in FarmHouse. So I don't know the names of all the cooks in the past because I've only been in FarmHouse about 3 years, but tonight, just so to recognize our current cook, I'd like to thank her for her service of the last 4 years. Miss Pam Gladding, she's been an excellent cook for us, and I just want to give her some recognition tonight. But on behalf of the active chapter, I want to thank all of the alumni for your dedication and service to the fraternity throughout the years. Each of you has maintained our motto as being builders of men. And it's our responsibility to continue that, as active members, to continue that into the future. Each and every one of you has built a wonderful foundation for us to build a structure upon, and it's our duty to erect the best structure upon this campus, upon the firm foundation that you have all built for us. So I'd like to thank you once again for all of your work, and I hope you all have a wonderful night.
After hearing that report, those of you that are founding fathers along with me, I can only say it's getting better all the time, fellas. Now, let's hear from Dr. Monty Chappell, who is currently the president of the association, to share with us anything that's on Monty's mind here.
Okay, you active chapter members, just ease back. It's not going to be all that bad. You know, being fifth on this list is a bit of a challenge. I know you had a big meal. I kind of feel like Hugh Hefner's latest significant others, folks. I don't really know how to make it interesting, and I know you may fall asleep at any time. But I'll do my best. Woo. I'm pleased to bring you greetings from the Kentucky Farmhouse Fraternity Association Board. This group of dedicated men, of alumni and active chapter officers, serve essentially as the landlord for the fraternity, and we work to maintain the structure of the house and maintain its lower level contents. Dean Wall, I want to assure you that just this year we retired the last of the chairs that you brought in 50 years ago. Jeff Kane and I bought 4 chairs this summer, and they've replaced those, and we're pleased about that. We meet every month during the school year and listen to the amazing reports from the active chapter. Now let me tell you how this goes. They ask us whether we want the good news first or the bad news first. And we usually take the bad news and then they give us the good news. Now, in view of that, folks, I would like for all the attorneys that are here tonight to leave a business card with my wife or with Dennis Liptrap, because from time to time we get some reports that are a little bit hair-raising. Dennis commented to me that we remember the 6 semesters, Dennis, out of the 54 where we had the biggest problems. I think one reason why the fellows do as well as they've done on the other 48 is they don't want to come in and tell the board that grades didn't go well. We're very pleased with the accomplishments of the chapter, and we welcome the relationship with them. Since the retirement of the bonding on the house on Hilltop in 1983, and Rusty Thompson, we finally paid off that $84,000 note that you and I signed several years ago in fire improvements. We're able to make substantial improvements on the house, and we've got some of the money that was in the till, folks, when I went on the board in 1980, not 80 years ago, in 1980, Dennis. Thanks to the work of Dr. Liptrap. To say that Dr. Liptrap has fiscal responsibilities would be to say that Dean Wall is a good man. You know, it's just an understatement. We don't spend money very wildly, and Dennis is out of town. But we've just installed the new fire sprinkler system. In fact, we're the first fraternity or sorority to meet that obligation under the new campus regulations that resulted from the fire at Murray several years ago. The association board provides major funding for travel to Conclave and various other leadership activities for the chapter. We work with them to provide many of the small items that they request money for from time to time. And they're rather a humble group when they come hat in hand, but we usually are able to meet those obligations. Our association is recognized as one of the most active and supportive alumni groups on the UK campus. As president of the board, and I think I'm in my 11th or 12th year or something like that, I've had an opportunity to work with many of the administrative offices across the campus. And it's really heartwarming to realize how FarmHouse is viewed with the highest esteem by our campus administration. I trust that this legacy, which has been so carefully nurtured throughout the past 50 years, will continue to be celebrated throughout the new millennium. And I'd ask the present members of the board and all past members of the board to please rise and be recognized. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Now, moving along in our program, we're delighted to have a person here from the international organization. Jim Griffith is here. He was a Missouri farmhouse man in 1993. He now is executive director of FarmHouse International. Jim, would you come and share a few remarks with us?
Wow, what an evening. What a chapter that you have here. It's a real pleasure for me to be with you tonight. It's with some sadness, much sadness really, that I must report to you that this summer, FarmHouse lost its last direct link to our principal founder, D. Howard Doan.